When night falls, my light stretches out, reaching toward the bench across from me, touching the snow as it settles. People pass by each day, the quiet conversations, the hurried footsteps, the laughter and the warm breaths. I may be just a lantern, but on winter nights like this, I feel like I'm part of their stories, casting a little warmth into the cold. But when the snow starts to fall, everything changes. People walk slower, look around more, and sometimes they even stop. The snow and my light, there's something about the combination that seems to pull them in, like it wraps them in a quiet spell. Almost like the snow and the glow stir up something in them. Old memories, maybe. They don't always stay long, but for a few moments I feel like they remember something warm, something nostalgic. Sometimes I wonder what they're thinking about. Maybe the snow reminds them of something, someone they loved, a winter long past, a moment of quiet joy. It's funny, but I feel like I share those memories with them, even if I'm not really a part of them. I hold them, somehow. Their laughter, their quiet thoughts, the way they stand in the snow for a few seconds longer than they planned, just to stare at me and be still. Tonight is one of those nights. The snow is falling gently, thick flakes swirling through the air. The world is softer, quieter, and I feel a little more alive. I can hear the snowflakes as they land on the ground, and I watch the soft glow of my light dance on the white blanket that covers everything. The air smells fresh, clean. Everything feels at peace. And I stand here steady and constant, watching it all. Sometimes I wonder if anyone truly sees me. They see my light, of course. But do they see me? I'm not big or grand, not like the moon or the stars. But I'm steady. I'm always here, waiting for the next person to walk by. With the snow falling heavier, I feel my light grow warmer, giving light to a passing car so they can drive safely, guiding them through the shifting, snowy road ahead. The way the snowflakes catch my light, how they float gently to the ground, making everything seem softer, quieter. It's like the snow gives everything a little more meaning. Then I hear it. The faint sound of footsteps crunching slowly through the snow, the rhythmic tapping growing louder with each step. The world is so quiet, so calm, that I can hear even the smallest sound, the shifting of feet in the snow, the faint rustle of coats, the soft murmur of voices growing closer. I shine a little brighter for them, as if welcoming the footsteps, inviting them to draw nearer. The voices reach me next, hushed and familiar, as though they've walked this path countless times before. Their laughter, soft and gentle, cuts through the stillness like a familiar tune echoing in the night air. They draw closer, the world around them quieting even more, as though holding its breath for what's to come. The man is tall, his figure wrapped in a thick coat and scarf, his face slightly weathered by the years but full of quiet strength. The woman walks beside him, her head nestled into his shoulder, a soft smile playing on her lips. She is bundled in layers, a woolen hat pulled snugly over her greying hair, and her eyes twinkle in the soft glow of the streetlights. Together they move slowly through the snow, their footsteps in sync, their presence wrapped in a quiet warmth that seems to fill the space between them. As they draw closer to the bench, the man stops, gently brushing the snow off his coat as if to prepare a place for them. His hand reaches for the bench, and he begins clearing the fresh layer of snow with steady, practiced movements. The woman stands beside him, waiting, watching with a soft smile on her face as she wraps her arms tighter around him, grateful for his presence. He glances up at her, his eyes filled with a quiet affection. She can hear the faint sound of his hands brushing away the snow, the soft scrape of his gloves against the wood. She shifts her weight from one foot to the other, her boots crunching lightly in the snow. Finally, After a few moments, he steps back, motioning for her to sit. "All done," he says, his tone warm and satisfied. With a soft laugh, she sits down first, careful to keep her balance on the icy bench. She looks up at him with a playful smile. "You always know how to take care of things," she teases gently, her eyes sparkling under the glow of the lantern. He smiles back at her, his hands still adjusting his coat. "I try," he says, lowering himself beside her on the bench. His body shifts closer to hers, their warmth mixing in the cold air. As they settle into the quiet comfort of their shared space, he reaches into his coat and pulls out a thermos. It gleams under my light, catching the soft amber glow. He unscrews the lid with a deliberate motion, the sound of metal parting breaking the stillness. "I thought we could use something warm," he says, his voice full of affection. "I brought some mulled wine to surprise you." Her eyes light up and a soft laugh escapes her lips. "A surprise?" she says, her voice playful. "What's the occasion?" The man looks at her with a twinkle in his eye, setting the thermos down between them. "No occasion," he says. "Just thought we could make a memory tonight, like we used to." She leans in, her smile softening as she looks at him. "You always know how to surprise me," she says with a quiet fondness, reaching for the thermos. She takes a sip, and the warmth of the drink spreads across her face, her eyes closing for a moment as the rich, spiced flavor fills her senses. "This takes me back," she says, her voice soft, almost distant for a moment. "I remember the first winter we sat here together. It was so cold, but we didn't mind. The snow was falling, but it wasn't too heavy. Just enough to make everything look soft, you know?" Her eyes sparkling with the same warmth she had that night. He leans back on the bench, his hand resting gently on the armrest. "It was early in the evening and we'd just left the party, you remember? I offered to walk you home, but I think I was hoping you'd ask to sit here." And he looks down for a moment, a brief laugh escaping him. "I wasn't sure if I should ask, so I just kind of, let you take the lead." She laughs softly at that, the sound like a melody that's always familiar. "You were nervous, weren't you?" she teases gently. "Just a little," he admits, his voice full of endearing honesty. "But then we got to the bench, and it was like the world had paused, the way the lantern shone on the snow and the way the park looked, all quiet and still. I don't think I'd ever noticed how peaceful it all was before. It felt like the rest of the world didn't exist." He pauses for a moment as if savouring the memory. The soft glow of my light reflects in his eyes as he continues. "And then you sat down first, right here. I remember thinking I had to be careful. I wanted everything to be just right. So I cleared the snow off the bench, just a little bit, so you wouldn't get snow on your coat." She smiles at him, the kind of smile that says she knows this story by heart, but still loves hearing it told again. "You did, didn't you?" she says with affection. "You were so careful. I thought it was sweet." He grins, clearly pleased by her response. "I wanted you to be comfortable," he says. "And then we sat there side by side, just like this. And for a while we didn't speak. We just looked at the snow and at the light from the lantern and, I guess that was the moment when I started to think I could really get used to this. To us. To sitting here together." She's quiet for a moment, her eyes distant as she relives that moment in her mind. "I remember the cold, but I don't remember feeling cold," she says softly. "I remember how the snow seemed to fall slower, like it was in no rush, and the way your hand brushed against mine." He smiles at the memory, the warmth of it clearly still with him after all these years. "I think we both knew something important was happening." She tilts her head slightly, a playful glint in her eye. "Do you remember the chocolate?" she said. He laughs at that. I had it tucked in my coat, though I wasn't sure if I should offer it. But, well, you looked at me with that smile of yours, and I thought, if I don't offer it now, I never will. So I did. Sorry the cacao was a bit melted. He laughs softly, the sound rich with affection. "It was perfect," she says. The old man takes a sip from the thermos himself, his hands wrapped around the warm metal. His fingers are a little gnarled, but his grip is firm. He leans back slightly, taking in the view of the snow, which seems to make the world feel smaller, more intimate. He looks up at me, the light on his face gentle, as if he knows I'm watching. Maybe he does. Who knows how many times he's paused under my glow, sat here beside his wife in the soft light, talking about the world or simply sharing the quiet. I remember another time we also sat here just like this. So many winters ago, it feels like. We were so young then, so full of plans. She smiles at him, her eyes softening with the memories. "You had a lot of plans," she teases. "I mostly remember how we'd sit and watch the snow fall, just like we're doing now. No plans, no rush, just being." I was a little more impatient back then, he admits with a rueful grin. She gives him a knowing look, one that says more than words ever could. "Funny," she agrees quietly, her voice almost wistful. She takes another sip of her mulled wine, her breath a little shaky from the cold, but her smile warm. I watch them in silence, feeling like I'm witnessing something sacred, something that doesn't need to be explained. Their words float around me, wrapping me in the stories they've shared, and I can't help but feel like I'm part of it. Just a small part, but still. Part of something that has lasted a lifetime. The man shifts a little on the bench, his movements slow but deliberate. He takes a long look at his wife, a glance full of quiet admiration. "You know," he says after a pause, "I wonder how many winters we'll have left." "Not many, I'm afraid." The woman doesn't look at him immediately, her gaze drifting out across the snow-covered path. I can tell she's considering his words, weighing them carefully. "As many as we need," she finally says, her voice steady and warm. "We've had our winters, all of them, together." I catch the softness of the moment between them, the way the world fades away when they share their quiet thoughts. Their words aren't full of regret, but of acceptance, the kind of acceptance that comes after years of living through winters, both hard and soft, both bitter and sweet. They don't need to say much. Their eyes speak louder than their words. There's something so delicate about their connection. I feel it too, in the way my light seems to wrap around them, softening the sharp edges of the night. They've lived through winters, through seasons of change, and yet here they are, together. The world around them may shift and change, but there's something about this moment, this bench, this lantern, that has remained the same. It's as though they're frozen in time, not needing to rush forward, just savouring what they have now. The old man leans back, his shoulders relaxing as he looks out at the snow-covered road. He takes another sip of wine, his eyes still on the path ahead. I wonder what he sees in the snow, in the quiet. Maybe it's the same thing I see, how time doesn't seem so important when everything around you feels still. How you can rest for just a little while in the knowledge that this moment, this simple moment of peace, is enough. He lets out a deep breath, a sigh that mingles with the crisp winter air. "I'm glad we came here tonight," he says, his voice soft. "Just to sit, to remember." She nods, her hand reaching for his. Their fingers intertwine with the ease of long practice. "We don't need much else," she says, the words so simple but true. And for a moment, all is still. the world falls away. The only sound is the soft hush of the snow as it falls, and my light, steady and constant, fills the space around them, casting a soft glow over their faces. I feel like I'm a part of this moment, even though I'm just a lantern. I light the road for them, but I also light the space between them, offering a warm, steady glow as they talk, as they reminisce, as they simply exist together in the quiet of the snow. Sometimes I think back to another night that has been captured in my memory. It was the kind of night where the world seemed asleep, wrapped in the cold hush of winter. Out of nowhere, I heard it, a low rumble, a sputter, and then nothing. Silence, but a new kind of silence. I knew then something had happened, something that interrupted the usual rhythm of the road. Not long after, a figure emerged, stepping out of the dark. A man, bundled up in layers against the cold, his breath visible in small clouds as he exhaled. His car had stalled just down the road, and he glanced back at it with a frustrated, almost helpless look. After a moment of hesitation, he walked toward me, his steps slow and unsure. When he reached the bench, he stopped, looking up at my light as if for comfort. He brushed the snow off the seat and sat down, huddling into his coat and rubbing his hands together. His face showed a mix of weariness and worry, and I could tell he was stranded with no help in sight. As he sat there, I watched him closely, casting my light gently over his shoulders, his back, trying to wrap him in a sense of safety. The snow kept falling, the world around us growing even quieter, and it was just him and me, together in the stillness. The minutes stretched on, turning into hours, and though he looked around every so often, there were no other lights, no passing cars, nothing to break the emptiness of the road. Eventually, he seemed to give up on the idea of rescue coming any time soon. I watched him pull a small, worn notebook from his coat pocket, flipping through the pages with a mix of fondness and sadness. Even now I wish I knew what was written on those pages. He looked at them with such care, his fingers tracing lines and turning pages slowly, as if each word was a part of him. It seemed to soothe him, bringing him some peace as he waited. Every so often he would look up, his gaze meeting mine. I don't know if he noticed how I tried to shine a bit brighter, stretching my glow to hold him there, like a warm embrace against the night's chill. I wanted him to feel that he wasn't completely alone, that someone or something was with him in that cold, silent night. He read through his notebook for what seemed like ages. Sometimes he would smile, though it was a quiet, almost private smile. Other times he would close his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, as if whatever was written on those pages carried memories, good ones, perhaps, or maybe a mix of memories, both bitter and sweet. I could only guess, but I could feel how deeply those pages meant to him. In a way, they were a comfort, as if they were holding him in the same way my light held him. After a while he looked at me, and then he wrote something down. Then, with a quiet, almost secretive determination, he pulled the page from the notebook, folding it carefully. He glanced around, then rolled the paper into a small scroll, and with a look in his eyes that I still can't quite understand, he reached down, pushing the tiny rolled-up paper into a gap beneath the bench. He closed the notebook, tucking it back into his coat with a gentle, almost reverent motion. He let out a long breath, and it hung in the air for a moment before disappearing into the cold. He looked up at me, his expression softened by a kind of quiet acceptance, and he said, as if to himself, "Guess it's just you and me tonight, isn't it?" Those words stayed with me, filling me with a strange warmth and understanding. Here he was, alone on the road with no one to call, no one to come for him, and yet he had found a kind of companionship in my light, and I, in turn, found purpose in his presence. For the first time in a long time, I felt that I was more than just a fixture on the roadside. I was a quiet friend, someone to keep him company through the long wait. Eventually, he grew tired, leaning back against the bench with his coat wrapped tight around him. His head drooped as he slipped into a light sleep, and I watched over him, casting my glow softly, protecting him from the dark, the cold, and the isolation. It was the only thing I could do, and yet it felt important, vital even. I remember feeling a strange protectiveness, as if he were more than just a stranger who'd happened upon my spot on the road. In that small, quiet moment, he was a part of my story, and I was a part of his. Hours passed, and the world around us remained still, the snow continuing to fall in gentle waves. I kept my light steady, guarding his rest, hoping that he could feel the warmth I was trying to offer. At last, there was the sound of an engine in the distance, and a pair of headlights broke through the night, casting long shadows as a tow truck came into view. The driver parked by the roadside and climbed out, walking over to the man and gently shaking him awake. The man blinked groggily, looking up at the tow truck driver with a mixture of relief and gratitude. I had been a small comfort to him, something constant and warm in a night that could have felt unbearably lonely. As he settled into the truck, he paused, looking back at me with a lingering, almost grateful look, as if to say, "Thank you." It was the kind of look that didn't need words, an acknowledgement that, even as a mere light on the side of the road, I had made a difference in his long, cold night. As he climbed into the tow truck and they pulled away, I remained there, my light casting a soft glow over the empty bench. It was just me again, alone in the quiet, with only the snow and the empty road for company. Yet, somehow, I felt different. I felt fulfilled, even in my solitude. I had been there for him, offered him light and company in his time of need. And though he had left, I knew that the memory of that night would stay with me, tucked away, just as his notebook had been tucked into his coat pocket. It was a memory I would hold on to, a reminder of the quiet ways we can be there for one another, even when all we have to offer is a simple light in the dark. Since that night, endless winters have come and gone, and my light has watched the seasons change. People sit on the bench passing through, wrapped up in their own lives, their own stories. But not one has found that small paper hidden beneath the bench. Sometimes I wonder what he wrote and why he felt the need to leave it there. What secrets could it hold? What memory did he leave behind in the dark, tucked away in the quiet place where my light barely reaches? I may never know. But I keep watching, wondering if one day someone might find it and bring his story back into the light. There was another night, years ago, when the snow fell hard, swirling thickly through the air, almost like a storm. The wind howled and whipped through the trees, filling the night with the roar of a fierce winter storm. Snow and ice pelted down, swirling chaotically through the air, and every gust seemed louder than the last. Branches creaked and cracked under the weight of the snow, and each snap echoed through the dark, breaking up any moment of calm. It was a night thick with sound and fury, every noise heightened by the storm's power, as if nature itself was restless and churning. That's when I saw it, a small, shivering figure, low to the ground, darting between shadows on the other side of the road. My light reached out, illuminating what turned out to be a tiny puppy, barely big enough to hold its own in the cold. It moved with a hesitant, almost desperate energy, nose to the ground, clearly lost and alone. Its fur was matted with snow, and with each gust of wind, it staggered slightly, like it could be swept up by the storm at any moment. I tried to shine brighter, to guide it toward me, but the puppy seemed oblivious, wandering closer to the road with each step, the puppy's small paws slipping on the icy ground. It seemed to hesitate, then finally noticed the light I cast nearby. Slowly, It made its way to me, huddling close to the base of my post, as if it sensed that my glow offered some warmth and shelter from the cold. The storm raged on, the wind biting and relentless, but I held my light steady, hoping that the warmth I provided could keep this little creature safe. It was so small, and each shiver seemed to make it shrink even further into itself, pressing close against my post as if trying to absorb the light directly. I watched over it for hours as the storm swirled around us. The puppy's breathing slowed, and I worried as it drifted into a fitful sleep, its tiny body nearly covered by the thickening snow. I wished I could reach down, shelter it more fully, but all I could do was shine, my light spreading around it like a protective glow, keeping the darkness and cold at bay as best I could. Just when the night felt like it would never end, I heard a distant sound, a faint voice calling out through the storm, barely audible over the wind, but as the moments passed, it grew louder and more frantic. A child's voice calling out into the night with urgency and worry. "Max, where are you?" a girl shouted. The puppy stirred at the sound, its ears perking up, its head lifting just slightly. I shone my light a little brighter, hoping that the voice would draw closer. Soon enough, a figure appeared through the snow, a small girl bundled in a thick coat and scarf, her face flushed with cold and worry. When her eyes met the puppy under my light, relief broke over her face like a sunrise. "Max!" she cried, running forward and scooping the puppy up into her arms. The puppy, still drowsy and shivering, let out a small whine of happiness, licking her face as she held him close, warming him with her own body. Her relief was so strong I could feel it from where I stood, and a sense of warmth spread through my light as I watched them reunited under my glow. Her parents arrived moments later, calling out her name as they hurried through the snow, their expressions mirroring her relief. They brushed the snow from the puppy's fur, exchanging words of thanks and quiet reassurance, all huddled together in the circle of light that I cast. They lingered for a moment, the girl cradling her puppy and whispering soft words to it as her parents stood nearby, holding each other close. The snow continued to fall around them, but there was a warmth there, a comfort that held them all together in the glow of my light. Since that night, I've thought about that little puppy often, about how close it had come to danger and how grateful I was to have been there, a small point of warmth and safety. It was a fleeting moment, but it mattered. And over the years, as I stood here, watching the seasons change, I sometimes wondered if I'd ever see them again. And then, one night, many winters later, it happened. The wind was calm, the night air crisp and quiet, with only a few soft flakes drifting down from the dark sky above. I felt the faintest vibration of footsteps through the frozen ground. The sound grew closer, accompanied by the gentle crunch of boots on snow. I brightened a little, casting my glow across the path, ready to meet whoever was approaching. As they stepped into my light, I recognized her instantly. She was no longer a young girl. She was a woman now, taller, her posture graceful and assured. Her hair fell in gentle waves beneath her knitted hat, and her face held a quiet, thoughtful expression as she gazed around, as if taking in every detail of the scene. And beside her walked a large, sturdy dog with a thick coat, his eyes bright and alert. He paused at my base, sniffing the air before looking up at me, his eyes soft and familiar. It was him, the same puppy, now grown, no longer small and frightened, but steady and strong, standing by her side. My light warmed, casting a golden glow over them both, and I felt a surge of quiet pride. They had both returned, safe and well, carrying with them the memory of that stormy night. In their presence, I felt a sense of completion, a full circle closing softly in the winter air. The woman glanced down at her dog, a small smile on her lips as she reached to stroke his head, her fingers gently combing through his fur. "Remember this spot, Max?" she murmured, her voice a soft, affectionate whisper that I caught through the stillness. The dog wagged his tail slowly, pressing his head against her hand in response. They stood together in silence, just the two of them and me, wrapped in the quiet glow of my light. I could see memories flicker across her face, a mix of nostalgia and gentle amusement, as if she were remembering that night just as vividly as I was. Her gaze drifted around the area, taking in the bench, the road stretching away into the shadows, the trees bare and silent under their blanket of snow. I could almost hear her thoughts, how she might be remembering the frantic search, the relief she'd felt when she found him safe under my light. I felt honored to be part of her memories, to have been a beacon in a moment that had mattered to her, and I knew somehow that she was grateful for it. After a while, she took a seat on the old bench, brushing a light layer of snow from the wood before settling in. Max curled up at her feet, resting his head on his paws, his eyes half closed but still alert, as if watching over her. She sat quietly, her gaze thoughtful as she looked out over the road, her hands tucked into her coat for warmth. In that moment, I felt connected to her in a way that went beyond words. She was no longer a child, yet part of her still carried the memory of that little girl who had run through the snow, calling for her lost friend. Time passed, and the world around us grew still, as if holding its breath. I cast my glow gently over the pair, watching as she leaned down to scratch Max's ears, her expression softened by a warm, distant smile. She looked around, as if she were seeing not just the present moment, but all the memories layered beneath it, the nights spent here with her dog, the winters that had come and gone, the quiet moments shared under my light. I wanted to hold on to this moment, to keep them here as long as possible, safe and warm in the circle of my glow. But eventually, she rose from the bench, dusting the snow from her coat as Max stood beside her, his eyes watchful and loyal. She looked down at him, and for a moment I could see the girl she once was, smiling at the little puppy she had found under my light. It was a memory I held close, and I knew it was one she cherished as well. As they began to walk away, she paused for a moment, turning to look back at me. Her gaze lingered, thoughtful and appreciative, as if she understood the role I had played in that distant winter night. She whispered a quiet, "Thank you," her voice soft and sincere, and I felt a warmth spread through my light, a sense of peace and fulfillment. She and Max walked off into the night, their figures fading into the gentle snowfall, and I watched until they disappeared from view. The path was empty once again, the silence settling around me like a soft blanket. But I felt content. I had seen her through a difficult night, had been there for a moment that had mattered, and now, years later, she had come back to say goodbye in her own quiet way. The memories settled quietly, like snowflakes drifting to rest on the ground. I held my light steady, coming back to the present moment. The old couple were still nestled together on the bench under my glow. They sat in comfortable silence now, having shared their thoughts, laughs, and sips of mulled wine. The snow fell gently around us, blanketing the street and muffling the sounds of the world beyond, creating a small bubble of warmth and peace. They seemed content to simply be, soaking in the quiet joy of the moment until a curious look crossed the husband's face. He leaned forward, peering down at something wedged between the slats of the bench, a little hint of curiosity lighting up his eyes. I watched closely as he reached down, gently pulling out a small folded piece of paper, its edges a bit weathered from time and the elements. His wife looked over, intrigued as he held the paper up to the light, brushing off the dusting of snow. "What's that?" she asked softly, leaning in closer. "I'm not sure," he replied, unfolding the paper with careful hands. "Looks like someone left a note here. Looks old." He smoothed out the paper, and as he began to read, his face softened. The faint lines of ink, still visible in my light, seemed to bring a quiet thoughtfulness to his expression. Slowly, he read the words aloud for her to hear. "To the person who finds this note. On this bench, beneath the glow of the streetlight, I found warmth and peace on a dark, cold night. I hope it brings you the same. Life goes by in a blink, but peaceful pauses like this stay with us. J.M., January 3rd, 1997. A soft hush fell over them as the words hung in the air. His wife reached out, gently holding his hand, her eyes warm with understanding. They both took a deep breath, as if savouring those simple yet powerful words. "Well, that's something special, isn't it?" she whispered, looking around as if to thank the unseen writer. "Whoever left this, I think they must have sensed something unique here, just like we do." The man nodded, lost in thought. "It's a kind of reminder, don't you think? That life is beautiful, even when it's quiet, even in these little moments." They sat in silence, holding the note gently between them. It was as though, for just a moment, they were sharing an understanding with a stranger from long ago. Someone who had once sat on this very bench, beneath this very light, feeling the same comfort and peace. After a moment, the husband looked down at the note again, his eyes gleaming with an idea. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pen. Then, glancing at his wife with a smile, he unfolded a napkin from his pocket, jotting down a few words of his own. She watched him with a soft smile, curiosity and warmth in her gaze. "What are you writing?" she asked, a twinkle in her eye. "A reply," he answered, and the quiet joy in his voice spoke volumes. When he finished, he read his words aloud for her. "To the one who left this note, thank you. My wife and I have shared so many moments here under this light. To the one who left this note, thank you. May the warmth of this place bring peace to all who find it." She smiled, touched, and together they gently placed his note back alongside the original, tucking both carefully into the same spot on the bench. For a long moment, they just sat there, holding each other close, a peaceful silence falling over them as snow continued to drift around us. Then, with a contented sigh, the husband rose and offered his hand to his wife, helping her to her feet. She took his hand with a warm smile, and together they turned to leave, their silhouettes slowly fading into the snowy night. I held my light steady, casting a gentle glow over the bench and the two notes nestled together. A quiet satisfaction settled over me, a deep sense of purpose and peace. This was my place, my purpose, and though my part was simple, I felt a warm connection to each person who paused here, leaving a small piece of themselves behind in the glow of my light. As the snow continued to fall and the night grew still, I remained, a steadfast guardian of memories, waiting for the next chapter to unfold under my quiet, constant light.